Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Janani, and I'm very excited to bring you a special Women's Day podcast with a most distinguished guest, Swarnima Bhattacharya. When we first met, we were both very excited and curious about each other's work in the field of health, especially public health, and we thought it would be wonderful to explore that in our conversation today. So let me introduce our guest. Swarnima is the co-founder of Gayatri, a women's health platform backed by Dr. Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, Rain Matter VC, and more. She previously practiced public health with the UN, WHO, and the Government of India. She is a Business World 40 Under 40 awardee for healthcare and an AstraZeneca Young Health Program scholar. She actively angel invests in purpose-driven ventures through Blue Dot Partners. We are very lucky to have her with us today. Welcome, Sarinama.
Thank you so much, Janani, and thank you for that warm introduction. I'm really, really excited about this conversation because, as you said, it's a Women's Day special, and even though we'll be talking about public health overall, so many of the things that I'm looking forward to touch upon have a very specific impact on women and a very differentiated impact on women. So, can't wait to get this conversation started. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So, you've worked in healthcare in various capacities in the UN and with the government and projects with WHO and with AstraZeneca. What were your various projects in these places, and what kind of insights did they give you that inform your organization today? Do you want to talk a little bit about each one?
Yeah. So I think I'll just talk a little bit about some of the common threads across these spaces and the difference in approaches, because every organization has a particular role, and the mandate that I had in each space and the role I therefore played was a bit different. So even though I was working on, health policy in various ways, the approach was very different, and the outcome that I was expected to drive was very different. I think there are two things that really stand out for me from my sort of pre-entrepreneurial phase, as I like to call it. One is, of course, that one of the largest projects that I had worked on was housing and sanitation.
Mm.
That was something that I did with the UN, and so basically the idea basically was to see what were the housing regulations in various parts of the country, in districts and various other things, and how sanitation was being maintained, how sanitation was being serviced in those spaces. This was, remember, this is before Swachh Bharat, and this was before any of that. So this was an independent, conversation. This was not from the purpose of building toilets, but it
Mm.
was from the purpose of like really define, really trying to understand how in a housing space does sanitation even is it a priority? Like how does it get woven into the housing designs and policies? And it was a cross-cutting project. It spanned multiple locations, geographies, economic strata, and obviously a lot many years. And I think that was the time when I really realized for the first time that women's health, you know, is not just about gynecology.
Mm.
You know, I was really young at the time. This was like right after my college, and I was still, I had not zeroed in on what aspects of healthcare really interest me, or
Mm.
that it does,
Yeah.
or the things that I felt very passionate about, they come under public health. I did not have the language at the time to articulate it. But
Yeah.
I think this project, really sort of, gave me the language
Mm.
to think about it. For example, who are the people who are thinking about urban policy? How does what part of urban policy does housing fit into? What is the kind of housing and what is defined as housing?
Mm.
There are so many habitation spaces which do not come under housing, and people just make makeshift arrangements for themselves, which is their home, which is their house, which is their private space. And sanitation, and especially from a gendered perspective, from a child's rights perspective, etc., that is not written into those things. So I think and obviously that has like a massive outcome on like healthcare. Now, while that was not a scope of that project, I independently learned a lot about it. I independently did a lot of lateral research around it for my own understanding, and because I was like really young and very very enthusiastic at the time to like just unearth more. So I think that was one. The second is that there was another project which was a little bit more medico legal in in its approach, where basically we were looking at some of the medico legal frameworks in some conflict zones in India. So what are the, and I think that was a transformative experience for me. I think it really solidified what I wanted to do. I realized that women's health is something I'm definitely passionate about, because we were seeing that how shall I put it? When we think of medical frameworks of policy and everything, I would say that as of today, India is on fairly solid ground in terms of giving a certain amount of reproductive autonomy, etc., etc. But I did realize that a lot of it was not from a very rights-based perspective, but a little bit more paternalistic. For example, women's right to abortion and things like that. So while ultimately the ultimate outcome is that India has a fairly liberal approach to abortion and medical termination of pregnancy, etc. The impetus for that was not rights based; it was very paternalistic and protectionist. You know, that was my takeaway at the time. And this is a debate that I think still people in the women's health space keep they are engaged in a lot. So I
I
think
I
that's
just wanted
yeah,
to ask about that.
yeah,
Like, what exactly do you mean by paternalistic? Like, what is it
yeah.
that is
So,
actually driving that?
yeah. So I think a lot of the the origins of the regulation around abortion and MTP and various other things had a lot to do with sex determination. Like
Oh, okay.
banning sex determination
Hmm.
tests and things like that, or at the fetal stage, and preventing all of that. So that people, and even now if you go to like clinics in India and even the larger hospitals, they say the sex determination is under banned under the law, etc., etc. So a lot of the origins of the MTP and the abortion rules and regulations, they have their roots in preventing sex determination tests of
Hmm.
fetuses, and so that it does not get misused, etc.,
Right.
etc. So therefore even, and not just that, while it is definitely, as compared to many other nations, you can still get an abortion in India, at up to a fairly, reasonable, time period. The reporting that the doctors have to do, that is a bit difficult. There is it's they have to fill up a form, they have to note down what is the reason for adoption, they have to say, okay, threat to life, stress, this, that, and all those kinds of things. A lot of it is not, those options are not, they don't indicate any choice, they don't indicate
Mm.
any they indicate that there is a lot of suffering,
Hmm.
some injustice that has happened, and therefore this step is being taken. So generally, like now the problem with that is that if this is how medico legal terminology is codified, then it becomes about the subjectivity of the doctors. So you will find a lot of
Mm.
doctors who are very broad minded, they will play a very supportive role, but there are a lot of doctors who are not,
Mm.
you know and the average woman out there is not very aware of these nuances and these intricacies, so they often are not able to advocate for themselves in a clinical setting.
Yeah.
So I think that's the reason why, like, I am a bit of a moderate in this space. Like, there are a lot of people who believe that India's abortion laws need to be much more rights based and much more, much better. There are some who are like, oh my god, at least we have it. So
Yeah.
I'm somewhere in between, because um I don't think that I'm very happy with just that, oh, we have it, you
Right.
know um, but at the same time I am grateful for that. So I'm somewhere in between,
Right.
because I feel that you know this is something that I've seen in my women's health journey, in my entrepreneurial journey, and even in the policy space. in my, like, I have not been in this, I mean, I'm not that old. I've just been working for about 10, 12 years, but even during this time, I have seen some things like really happen that women before me have like really advocated for, like
Mm.
the Vishakha guidelines turning into the posh act, etc., etc., the prevention of sexual harassment at workplace act, etc. A lot of things have gotten better and better because people have really advocated for it, and it's happened, thing.
Mm.
And even now the posh act is not perfect, and people are still advocating for it. So I really believe that the policy framework has to be transformative,
Mm.
because there will always be a lag in execution.
Mm.
We are a tremendously diverse country,
Yeah.
absolutely tremendously diverse, and there will always be subjectivity um, in execution.
Mm.
So the codification of the policy has to be all encompassing, has to be transformative. It has to be, it cannot advocate for incremental changes.
Mm.
So therefore, while I do agree that in terms of abortion and mtp, we are okay, but I do believe that that should not make us complacent, and we should
Yeah.
still advocate for it to be better. So
Hmm.
that's what I meant. So
Okay.
yeah, I think these were some things that really shaped my perspective on what I want to do with women's health and
Mm.
how I personally want to approach it.
Mm.
Of course, what one wants to do is also mediated by market forces, mediated by the role of capital, etc., etc. And
Yeah.
of course, one has to adjust, I think, to the extent one is comfortable. And I've done that. But I think I have a clear vision
Mm.
of what I want my work in healthcare to be like,
Mhm.
and working in women's health in a certain way is definitely a part towards that journey.
Okay. Are there any stories from any of this work that you've done in these extremely well-renowned places that you want to share just as a some kind of a symbolic way to kind of convey
Yeah,
your
I mean,
experience, what's defined your direction?
sure. I think I'll share some experiences from the COVID time.
Hmm.
Um, that was a really difficult time, I think, when I just felt at that point of time that there is a huge, how shall I say, like, I don't think at that point of time that I just saw that what is the how shall I say, the shortfall
Mm.
of policy if it's if it is not context specific. I felt that because we were going to hospitals, we were collecting a lot of data, this and that. There was a lot of data that was not there, it was not codified in the right way. It spawned a whole lot of other conversation that Indian hospitals and Indian medical setups and clinical setups are sitting on a vast amount of data, but is it being codified in the right way?
Yeah.
Is it being harnessed in the right way? What are the ways in which one can do it? What is the idea of privacy, this and that? Then that whole Abha situation happened around that time. Some people thought it was great, to have those health records. Some people, like the debates. So I think there was a lot of it was a particularly a massive turning point in my head, because it made me want to study public health. I've not
Mm.
studied public health. I've only
Okay.
practiced it as a professional. I'm an English literature graduate, but my career has taken me in the public health and healthcare direction. And I really wanted to study public health at that point of time. I felt, there were not a lot of public health practitioners who I think knew what they were doing,
Mm.
if I
Okay.
may say so. And also because the challenge in front of us was unprecedented, even though India has had significant public health victories in the past, like the polio,
Yeah.
situation and various other things. So it does have significant victories. But I think COVID was just unprecedented in so many
Yeah.
ways. It just showed us that when something is sudden, when something is uncontrolled, then we do not have the infrastructure deployment capabilities.
Right.
A lot of people say, oh, we don't have infrastructure. I think we do have infrastructure.
Mm.
you know we do have infrastructure, we do have the right templates. And even during COVID, there were some victories. For example, the public health messaging, the wash the hands,
Yeah.
wear your mask, the public health messaging and communication was a victory. But I think the deployment of capital, the deployment of resources, the deployment of space, clinical space, that was like massively done wrong, I would say. So I think India is very good at building infrastructure.
Mm.
And I think because we're such a diverse and massive country that we take our time, studying contexts, deploying and pushing messaging. COVID was something that we had to do 10 things
At a
together
time. Yeah.
all at once, and we didn't do it as much as we could have. Although,
Mm.
again, there are debates, in everything in public health. There is a sort of side that says, oh my god, we were horrible. There was some, they were like, oh my god, no, but we could have been much worse. Look at some other countries, blah blah blah. Obviously the reality is somewhere in between. And I think for me, what really matters is that what made me think when I was looking at hospitals and I was talking to doctors, I was talking to nurses, and I was talking to hospital administrators who were not from the medical field. I think my takeaway was that the way India's clinical spaces are designed, they need quite an overhaul. Like right now, it's like when somebody thinks of a hospital space, we think government hospitals or private hospitals. But middle India is going to these small clinic hospitals in their neighborhood and in their locality. So
Mm.
I'm from Lucknow, okay?
Mm.
Lucknow is the capital of UP, but it's a very creme de la creme that goes to the big private hospitals.
Okay.
Majority of middle India, is going to, a 20-bed facility for
Mm.
some, quick thing, because the family doctor works there or something
Right.
like that, or the family doctor is associated. So I think, but there is a gap in empowering these middle India clinical settings, and I think that really sort of suffered during the COVID time. So yeah, I mean, I think I can go on and on. I'll just, stop now. But yeah, one can go on and on about anecdotes and observations and learnings. But yeah, it was a lot. And I hope to just pick up one thread at a time and then apply that in my entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I mean, I think it's really interesting how the experience feeds into the direction that you want to go and kind of reveals spaces that need work. And a situation like COVID definitely did that for us and revealed all the weaknesses that we need to work on, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so another question that I had is from a public health perspective, which are some of the global health needs that you believe we must pay attention to, especially from the context of the global majority?
I think quite a few things, but I think more than the trends, I would say that from the perspective of the global majority, I'm not sure we are paying enough attention to the ramifications of the climate crisis, and what it is really doing to lived experience on a day-to-day basis. For example, I live in Delhi. There is people are always about AQI, 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 this, that, fix Delhi's AQI, this and that. But Delhi's AQI is part of a much larger problem,
Okay.
and I feel that the fact that we're in the midst of a global climate crisis, and the global majority is a space where generally I mean, I don't want to mince any words, it basically is a dump yard of the world, like we export waste materials, for example, from the other parts of the world and then find ways to dump it. I mean, we have to change all of that. you know we are yet to find a great foothold in the vaccine alliances and the vaccine politics. We're not doing a great job yet. We could be doing much better. And I think given India's significant public health victories, I'm not saying we are perfect, but there have been some significant public health victories. I feel that we are not looking at health prevention, illness diagnostics, and various other things from the lens of this climate crisis. We are
Mm.
not talking enough about chronic illnesses which are skyrocketing.
Yes.
Okay, we are not talking about cancers among the younger people. We are not talking about setting up policies and spaces for clinical trials to be in India and for people to participate in those clinical trials. If you look at cancer research and cancer care, the costs are prohibitive. I mean, it is just only extremely wealthy people have any hope of coming on the other side. You know,
Okay.
it
Yeah.
just that is just the unvarnished reality of cancer care. Then, the idea of mental health, and one of the reasons, and I'm going to talk more about it as we speak. I mean, one of the reasons I've been very intrigued about your work is, you're talking about brain health and things like that. We just do not know. I think the brain is the vast unknown, and we are always talking about things like, oh, mental health, brain gut axis, this and that. But have we understood the brain enough?
Mm.
Do our clinical settings, give a patient enough time to even go there to ask these holistic overarching questions? The answer is no. But I think, and I don't mean to, overburden the doctors, because I know that they're overburdened in a country like ours. But the onus is on the medical practitioners, and on the public health practitioners to really tie these threads together. So I think really looking at our health projections from the perspective of the global climate crisis, which is to say that things are only about to get worse if you
Yeah.
don't do something major. And it is not about erecting more hospitals and adding a healthcare budget. It's really about looking at construction policies, looking at vehicular pollution,
Mm.
looking at like particulate matter pollution. Our policies right now have gaping holes in them,
Hmm.
and that is affecting our health.
Yes.
And women, I mean, I don't even want to, women are vastly overtly affected by these situations than, the women are much more vulnerable towards it.
Mm.
So yeah, I think that's something that I feel very passionately about.
Agreed. Yeah. So this we'll probably be coming back to circling back to some of these
Yeah.
topics when it's my turn to answer the questions, but I've quite a
Yeah,
bit to
but
say about.
I would like to, I just want to take this thread a little bit and, see, I just want to, because we're talking about chronic conditions, which
Yeah.
is such and I mean, I remember when I was a child, at that time, my dad had BP, he had, my grandfather had diabetes and things like that. A lot of these used to feel like very, these things happen as you age.
Yeah.
That is the kind of,
Messaging around it.
messaging around it. But it's wrong. It's obviously, that really came in the way of preventative health. But you see, you have been you have a PhD in neuropsychology. You have worked in mind body medicine and lifestyle medicine, and you've helped people prevent and reverse illnesses characterized by chronic inflammation. And you're also, the thing that intrigues me so much, aside from being the founder of Rise Wellness, you're also currently the vice president of the Whole Brain Health Initiative. So I just want to understand from you that you've got quite the body of work around chronic inflammatory conditions, and a lot of these are very difficult to manage,
Hmm.
because it needs a long-term view. There are multiple adjustments required behaviorally, and there is a lot of resistance. People are still thinking that, oh, I'm going to think about it when I cross 40, when I cross 50, and the
Yeah.
danger of that is that you just miss the warning signs. So what I want to ask you is that in your experience, what works? There are people who manage this long term. What do they do differently as a practitioner? What do you do differently to really manage these chronic conditions and inflammatory conditions properly?
Yeah, so lifestyle medicine, the way that I with the way that I define it and practice it has five pillars, right? So these are all things that we have control over, and which is why it is such an important part of the public health conversation, because the more awareness and education there is about these five pillars, the more you're going to be able to prevent massive loads on the economy, on just generally like widespread suffering, right? So if
Yeah.
people could understand this from, school, college, and then have continued awareness, just like we do about infectious diseases, having large campaigns
Yeah.
about them, if we can have something similar about the non-communicable diseases, I think that can go a long way to preventing a lot of suffering now
Mm.
as well as like decades from now, because we are a rapidly aging population. As soon as
Yeah.
the greatest number of us get to the 50s and 60s, we're going to be in
Yeah.
pretty deep trouble if we don't act now, right?
Yeah.
So I'll just tell you a little bit about these five pillars. It's food, exercise, or any kind of movement, physical exertion, sleep,
Yeah.
social connection, and emotional health. So these are the
Yeah.
five pillars, right? And I think so doctors tend to handle the medical side of things. So when you say the onus is on the doctors to tie these threads together, I
Yeah.
think that their training, the way it is right now, isn't
Mm.
not only their training, but also their patient load, the case load that they have, is not conducive to being able to handhold every patient and teach them, look, these are the things you need to do, and this is how you do them. This is how you implement positive health habits that are long term and sustainable. And I think that that is where the health coaching groups may come in, right? Because so you can't just have the doctors do all this work. So they can be in charge of testing, diagnosis, dosage, all the medical sides of things, right? But you'll need people who are good at inducing adult behavior change, right? And that involves some level of coaching, much more intensive one on one work, regular work, a lot of time, and helping people through their individual obstacles. Is it time management? Is it a belief system? What is getting in your way in implementing these changes, right, in your life to bring these
Yeah.
five pillars back into balance? So, the things that I would say the people who succeed in making that reversal, what is different
Mm.
about them compared to people who try again and again in various ways and then constantly fail, is that
Mm.
the method that at least that I follow involves a lot of reconnecting with yourself, developing
Yeah.
self-awareness so that you know the early warning signs. So when you say I'm not going to pay attention till I'm 40 or 50, I'm
Mm.
saying you probably have some signs right now that your health is not optimal. And so let's
Yeah.
not stick to or settle for a mediocre level of health. Let's
Yeah.
look for
Yeah.
thriving so that when
Yeah.
something isn't going well, you can tell that it's not going well and then address it so that it doesn't get worse and it doesn't end up with something very sudden and drastic happening when you're 50, right? So
Yeah.
I'd say the self-awareness component is really key because you cannot always hand over the power of your own health to someone else and say, fix me, right?
Yeah.
No one else can fix you.
Yeah.
You are living your life. You are
Yeah.
responsible for your health. And if you're given, if we are able to, as a community of health practitioners in the public health industry, as well as the medical doctors and health coaches, all of us
Yeah.
are able to give the education and empowerment to the general public, then
Yeah.
they can actually take better positive action and they will make better decisions on their daily life, right? The
Yeah.
second component of what they do differently, the people that I work with, is I teach them that you cannot expect to change your health habits without it giving you some kind of joy. It has to give you
Yeah.
joy, right? So
Yeah.
if people come to me and they're like, I want to do this and I know I can, like, I have a lot of willpower and yeah, what I'm saying, how long is that going to last? And then life throws you a curveball and you're back to square one because you can't sustain it if you don't have joy. So,
Mm.
how do you integrate joy into each aspect of the changes you make? So, if you're going to change uh, from like vegetarian to vegan, you have to give up all the dairy products, and dairy is very prominent, prevalent in our country, right?
Yeah.
So, how would
Yeah.
you do that in a way that you can still feel joy and not a sense of deprivation when you go out, right? How do you prepare? How do you plan? How do you set up your kitchen or your house or your activities in such a way that this becomes effortless? That's the only
Yeah.
way it's going to succeed. You're not going to succeed if you have to fight it every day, right?
Yeah.
So, at the more like a broader, larger scale level, the questions that I would ask are more how can we construct our cities like urban city like planning, right? The way that people build spaces in a city, are they conducive to safe walking, pleasant walking, right? Even if you're in a very dense environment, if you have to cross three live wires and two holes in the pavement by the time you get to a pharmacy, you're not going to take a walk. You're going to try and take your car instead if you have a car, right?
Absolutely.
So this is important because when you're planning urban environments, you need to think about can this place be easily navigable by bicycle or walking or
Yeah.
some other way to stay active just as a side effect of living a normal life without having to dedicate precious time that you already stretched to the limit to go to the gym or to go do some, yoga class or whatever else. While
Mm.
those are great, but a lot of people have such a pressure on their time that they may not
Yeah.
be able to set aside, that's a luxury sometimes, right? Set aside time for doing your exercise. So if you can build it into your day, all the things that you have to do anyway. I have to go get my vegetables from the grocery shop, which is a 6 minute walk from here. But do I have to pull the car out for that because it's so unsafe? And I think I might be
Yeah.
run over by the truck by the time I cross the road, right? Because
Yeah. Yeah.
so basic safety for mobility, how do you construct spaces which are conducive also to community building, not just also
Yeah.
safety, right? So, community building, you meet each other, you talk to each other, you see people in the neighborhood who've been there in the same, like for
Yeah.
the last 20 years, you recognize each other by face and by
Yeah.
maybe by name. And so you have a sense of belonging to that place, right? And you can
Mm.
develop that rather quickly in India compared to other places, but making sure that
Mm.
that's not something we lose in the process of
Mm.
building more urban spaces in like more car
Yeah.
friendly ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
So some of
Yeah.
these
And I think,
thoughts in terms of, yeah,
yeah. No, I completely sort of agree. And this is precisely what I meant when I said, like looking at healthcare from the perspective of how the global majority is situated in the overall climate crisis. Like you mentioned, the idea of pleasant walkable cities.
yeah,
You know, like I live in Delhi, and I'm sure this is like not sort of indicative of all of India, but I must say a lot of India. I don't think it's walkable. Like, the weather is horrible all the
mm,
time. Like even if someone loves to walk, you can't.
mm,
When I go to some other places in India, like say to the hilly areas, or I travel overseas, I lose track of how long and how far I've walked.
mm,
But in a place like Delhi, because there's so much dust, the weather is either too hot or too cold, or too, when it's raining and pleasant, then the roads are horrible. It is a larger health hazard to, I think, just be out in the open. And
yeah,
I think that is a concern for me, because what happens is that there are some parks and spaces which are curated where people can go and breathe fresh air. But even though it is a so-called public space, public spaces are a contested term. When we say public spaces, politically not all spaces are really public.
mm,
Who gets to come into those spaces and be safe in those spaces is a matter of contestation.
mm,
So you see that a lot of beautiful public spaces, they do, there is a class in gender politics going on in those spaces. Not everyone can inhabit them at all times and feel safe about it. So I feel that definitely, I think I do feel that even if you're talking about the baseline level of health, let's talk about just the baseline level of health. In the global majority, just by virtue of being in the space, your baseline is not healthy enough. And how do we change that? What is the onus? And here I agree with you that, of course, medical practitioners can do only so much, but they cannot wave a magic wand and clean up your air.
right,
And therefore, the other stakeholders, must have a healthcare perspective and a human development perspective, as they develop the city, as they build the city. So yeah, I mean, completely in agreement with your experience there. And generally that, sorry, yeah, please go
I
ahead.
just wanted to add one thing. When you said public spaces are not always accessible to everyone, I wanted to share
Yeah,
something that I've observed.
yeah,
There's a government library not too far from here, and
mm,
to reach it, you have to cross a playground, which is publicly accessible, right?
yeah. Oh, sorry, what
And
is here when you say here? Like, just so when you
oh,
say
I'm in
right
Bangalore.
near. Okay. All
So
right, all right.
So when you're walking to this library, which I've tried to do a few times, there is a
Mm.
park or like a playground that is, and I notice every single time there is not a single girl playing there, right? There's all
Yeah.
boys playing. That's great. Good for them. I'm not saying they shouldn't play, but what about
Yeah.
the girls? Where do they go to play? I don't know if they do play outside. Where are they going to get their vitamin D? Where are they going to get their physical activity? Why is it not safe for them to go and inhabit
Mhm.
that place? And why do families or whoever and decide that that is not the right place for a girl to play, such that none of them
Yeah.
send their girls out there to play? So
Yeah.
this is a real concern for me because when you look at it like that, and then you look at women's health in the future, when we look, so my work with both autoimmunity and dementia, it affects,
Yeah.
so 80% of the people who have autoimmunity are women, right? And
Yes.
a larger
Yes.
majority of the people who have dementia are also women. So
Mm.
I'm thinking, how far back does it go in the conditions that they are
Yeah.
raised in, the belief systems, the culture that they're raised in, the
Yeah.
messaging that they receive, the conditioning that they receive? How much do these contribute to their developing these diseases? So Gabor Mate, I'm sure you're aware of his some of his work.
Yes.
He talks
Mm.
about how autoimmunity is more prevalent in women than in men, primarily because they don't have avenues to express healthy anger. They have been overloaded. They're constantly the
Yeah.
caregivers and they experience great levels of exhaustion, and their boundaries are hardly like they don't have boundaries. Like people don't consider
Yeah.
that they have boundaries in terms of
Yeah.
the energy levels or their health or whatever the sleep they need. So basic things are not being met. And
Mm.
so much is being asked for them. And this is why it kind of makes me quite unhappy to see some of these WhatsApp forwards that come around on Women's Day that celebrate self-sacrifice, that celebrate that you do everything, you don't think of yourself. I'm like, I'm not sure that that's a healthy thing to say, to
Yeah.
celebrate a woman as someone who will erase herself for others, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm thinking in terms of women's health. What are the
Mm.
cultural shifts that need to happen? What are the messaging that needs to change? A woman is still a valuable person even if she doesn't choose to have children, right? That is a hugely bold statement to say in front of anyone in India, especially gynecologists. Because when I have people who I know who want to improve their gynecological health and they seek a professional opinion from a gynecologist, one of the first things they're asked is, okay, how soon do you want to conceive? And when any of these people express that they don't want to, that they're not interested in that, right? Then they're like, then what's the point of your life? Is that the
Yeah.
only reason a woman exists, is to give birth and raise children? Don't we have personhood apart from that, right? So
Yeah. I
these are
mean,
some
I
of the
can say yeah, yeah. I mean, I can say a thing or two about that. I mean, I'm an prospective adoptive mom. And my trips to gynecologists are memorable in all the wrong ways
oh
until I
God.
actually found someone who is a very good fit and does not think of, sort of women's health in that way. But you're exactly right in terms of the cultural shift. Like, just yesterday I was speaking with somebody and they were like, what are the biggest obstacles in the femtech space and things like that. And I thought of a lot of things, about a lot of business issues and a lot of, the cost of customer acquisition, this and that. But I was like, you know what? No. The biggest obstacle is culture. The culture that tells young girls when their bodies are changing, when we withhold information thinking that women, young girls are, it's going to corrupt them to know more about their body, to be prepared for menarche, to be prepared for hormonal changes. When we, at least where I grow up, when girls are, their bodies are developing and changing, they're asked to dress in a different way,
Mm,
and they're inducing that shame to the extent that, when something is wrong with their bodies, they don't even know how to see the warning
talk about
signs,
it, right?
and the culture that is normalizing pain, which leads to a diagnostics gap, and the culture that is saying that, motherhood has to be nothing but joyful, which is, making postpartum depression this never ending saga. Or the culture that says that once you're 40, 45, and you're past your prime, then your healthcare really doesn't matter, and perimenopause and postmenopause care is non-existent. So
Mm,
there are cultural barriers at every level, where the messaging is implicitly and explicitly such, that your health is a cultural tool rather
mm,
than something that is supposed to prop you up. We don't, the messaging around women's health is very much around the functionality of cultural roles, like
Right.
you have to be like, for example, even when people are, I mean, this is so, I mean, it's irritating, for me so much that even when there is messaging around women's mental well-being, they're like, oh, you cannot pour from an empty cup. That's why you should sleep, and that's why you should. What if I don't want to pour? You know what I'm trying to, I mean, why? What if I just want to be a self-contained vessel?
Hmm.
So the point is that even the conversation around women's health and well-being is hinged on, oh, if the mother is unwell, then the family falls flat. That's a lot of people, they're like, oh my God, Swarnima, you must rest and you must take it because soon you'll be a mom.
Hmm.
I'm like, yeah, but like, what's your point? Uh, so this is the messaging, which I
Right.
think is, and it has real healthcare outcomes.
Yeah.
When we look at, you're so right in terms of the chronic conditions and everything, like the amount of preventable cancers that take the lives of Indian women, the number of early detection breast cancer cases that do not happen, the invisible toll of lack of sleep, the invisible toll of chronic conditions. Um, I mean, it's
It's huge.
massive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So, I mean, I just want to share that if within even the people that I help, you may not be surprised given that you just said all this, but how many times I have to tell a woman client that you need to take better care of yourself, you need to prioritize your health, and they say something along the lines of, I feel guilty to do that when I have to also cook for XYZ and I have to do these other jobs. So this, okay, say take an example. Woman X is a full-time employee of a tech company, right? So
yeah,
she has a high pressure job. It's not like her life is easy or simple from the career perspective. But
yeah,
in addition, she's also taking care of all the household work. She
yeah,
says and it's not like she's being forced into it by anyone. No one's telling her you must do all this, right? So that's the magical part of this. How does it work like
yeah,
this, right? So somewhere she's received the messaging that this is her job, and that so if both her and her husband have full-time jobs, there's no equal sharing of the household responsibility. It still falls onto the woman. There's no like
yeah,
chore wheel or chore chart on the kitchen wall saying, okay, it's your turn on Wednesdays to do the dishes and my turn on Fridays. There's nothing like that, right? That's just like a
yeah,
foreign concept here.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so where does it actually come from? It comes from within herself. She has internalized so many of these messaging throughout her life in such a way that
Mm,
when she has a health problem, which is a huge burden on her own progress and her own well-being in life,
mm,
as well as
mm.
on her family financially and everything else, even then she doesn't think that it's okay for her to take some time to sleep enough, right? And
Yeah,
that's all. That's
yeah,
like all I suggested before this whole conversation started. I was like, why do you force yourself to get up earlier than you feel like? When you get up, you don't seem to be able to do any of these things that you want to do. And she's like, yeah, I could sleep longer, but I know that I would be considered lazy if I sleep longer. And I said, really? If someone who needs X number of hours of sleep was getting 2 hours of sleep less every single night, and then they can't function well, is that laziness, my dear? It's not, right? It's not
yeah, yeah,
laziness, it's sleep deprivation. So,
yeah, yeah.
I mean, I have to fight this word
Absolutely.
lazy so often. It's just crazy. It's,
So often. Yeah. No, and also, see, this is what effective communication literally is, that without being told, the communication is so internalized that it leads to behavior change. One can only hope for this kind of, like the way patriarchy has gotten its communication right. One can hope that, positive public health reaches that high. That's what it is. You're right that no one needs to tell women explicitly anymore. We're
mhm.
doing it all by ourselves
And to
you
ourselves,
know
yeah.
and to ourselves.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, so to that I want to sort of ask you, because you also done so much of neuropsychology. So for example, when you are working with people with chronic inflammatory conditions, how does brain health figure into all of this? The reason I'm saying is because I'm so intrigued by this interconnection. Like on one hand, you're a chronic inflammatory coach, and a practitioner, and that you're also working with the whole brain health initiative in your work, and so also in your, for the lack of a better word, treatment, or your work coaching with other people. How does this interconnection really manifest? How do you bring that up? How does it have an impact on the way that you're approaching healthcare as a practitioner?
So I think the underlying thing that connects both autoimmunity and dementia is the state of chronic inflammation, right? Many people don't
Yeah.
think of, so they think of chronic inflammation and they think maybe an autoimmune immune condition, but they don't think of diabetes necessarily, or they don't think of heart disease, and they don't think of dementia. But all of these are characterized by chronic inflammation. So that is the
Yeah.
underlying factor that connects both. So if you're actually, so this is an interesting conversation we just had in the team meeting last week, is if you're able to address chronic inflammation in the younger generation in India now, just as a general
Yeah.
health public awareness type of thing, you're not going to just
Mm.
be preventing autoimmune conditions, you're also going to be preventing diabetes and dementia. So it's like a one underlying factor of several illnesses that come from that,
Mm.
right? So the way that I look at it is uh, if you are able to teach these habits,
Yeah.
so the five pillars, right? The bonus pillar is cognitive challenge. Right. So,
Yes.
keeping yourself mentally and physically active as you grow older, even after you maybe stop working and retire, and you don't just retire and watch TV. Why don't you try something else? Do something new and find a new purpose in your life, because purpose
Yeah.
is going to get you moving out of the house, socially connecting with others,
Yeah.
and cognitively stimulate you and make you potentially more physically active in the pursuit of
Mm.
whatever purpose you have chosen. So, purpose is a really important part, something to think about before you retire. Saying, okay, now I'm going to be
Yes.
done with my working life right now. What am I going to do next? What do I care about
Yeah.
enough to put my energy into that? So,
Hmm.
does that answer your question about the connection between the two?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And, so I have one, I know that we're also, in time. And I have a final sort of question for you. It's a bit overarching, but I just want to understand that. So, what is your vision, given that we are in the world as it is, like
Mm-hmm.
this is the state of our world. And I don't believe that the world just gets better one fine day. It's never linear, it's never coterminous, it's never homogeneous. And we have to live with the fact that there is always going to be a disparity, in control of resources, right? So, what is your vision given all these realities? What's your vision for a more holistic and integrated approach to health, to the idea of preventativeness, or preventative behaviors, or the idea of longevity? I feel very irritated that, the idea of longevity has somehow been hijacked by men, like we just have a lot of men and gadgets, talking about longevity as if it is something that can just be, so, and then traditional medicine, for example, it has a lot of beneficiaries, it's got a lot of believers, and I myself, have benefited in some ways. But those practitioners, and the practitioners of traditional medicine and the practitioners of Western medicine, are they're unable to come together to define some fundamental principles. A lot of such policy attempts have been made even in India, but it has like really not worked very well. But yet we see that for people who are healthy and people who are unwell and are trying to get healthy, they have really benefited from a combined approach. They take
Mm-hmm.
medication, they choose surgery when it's the right thing for them to do,
Necessary.
but it's always a holistic approach. They're doing yoga, they're thinking, they're learning from other traditional approaches. So what is your perspective around this holistic approach, and this what is a way to reconcile this dissonance, if I may put it that way?
Okay, so there was quite a lot of questions. So I'm just going to try and
Yeah,
go
I know.
one by
Sorry, it's a
one.
little.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'd say, yeah, what you said about the holistic approach, right? I think to see someone as in the full context of their lives, when you go to a doctor or anyone else, rather than to say, okay, I'm a gastro specialist, I'm going to look only at your digestive system, right? can we have some kind of a system somewhere along the pipeline where your financial stresses and your exposure to hazardous any kind of hazardous materials when you work or any other
Yeah.
emotional stresses that you're going through, family support, what kind of loneliness or whatever you're dealing with,
Mhm.
can we have some
Yeah.
place where all of these are looked into as part of your what could be your problem? Because if
Mhm.
you're looking at it just as one organ at a time, okay, eye specialist, gastro, dental, whatever, like each of them look at only the parts that they're responsible for, and there needs to be someone. Usually, it used to be the family physician, but nowadays,
Mhm.
that is also kind of like they keep changing. People don't necessarily always stick to one, or they move cities to another place and they don't find someone who they always knew who have their history. So there needs to be someone who takes the time to take you into consideration as a whole person, full with your
Yeah.
context, right? The
Yeah.
second element I would say is the integrative approach to medicine itself. So, when people are trained in Ayurveda, they are usually given some basics on what kind of medications are usually given because people are on Western medication and then they go to Ayurveda also. So, the Ayurvedic doctors have to know enough about Western medicines and their side effects to be able to handle that cross connection, that like you're going to take this and that, how does it affect each other and how may they interact, right?
Yeah.
But I don't see
Yeah.
that the Western medical education has the similar training about Ayurvedic principles. So they are
Mhm.
just, okay, we are doing our thing and that's it. Like we don't cover the other stuff. Sometimes we say complementary or alternative, that's like covered in one
Mhm.
small credit and that's it. Like it's not really
Yeah.
given much information. So to create a more integrative education for the medical students, where I mean, even if you leave aside the alternative approaches like Ayurveda, where there is still a lot of standardization and regulation that needs to be met for it to be integrated into standard like mainstream medicine, for it to become part of mainstream medicine, and that research needs to just happen. Like
Yeah.
the government or
Mm.
whatever funding has to happen so that those the rigor of the studies that study the Ayurveda needs to bring it up to speed the same way that a double-blind placebo-controlled study for this
Mm.
medication will work. You need that kind of information about the Ayurvedic stuff as well, right? It cannot be
Um,
too subjective. Then it's hard to standardize. But even if you leave aside the alternatives, can we have enough in the medical training that involves just lifestyle medicine? I don't see
yeah.
much training within the medical community. A lot of people who come to me are either related to doctors or doctors themselves because they know that
Mm.
within their framework, they don't have the answers for these chronic illnesses, especially like if you cut your finger, you have some like emergency stuff, you go to the doctor. Like the Western medicines, they're really good with that, right? But when it comes to chronic
Yeah.
illnesses, they may be able to like give you some medication to control tissue damage long term, but that's as much as they can do is manage the condition. They cannot resolve it for you. So if
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
able
Yeah.
to learn the principles of lifestyle medicine during their education, then they're going to be able to say, look, you can take this medication for now because it looks like you're about to go blind. We don't want you to lose your vision, right? So for now, take this. But at the same time, go do all of these changes in your lifestyle to make sure that you don't, in maybe 4 to 5 months, you don't need these medications. And I can start to
Yeah.
reduce the dosages. So if you take these medications long term, like years and decades, many people do, it has other extremely unpleasant side effects. So if you take steroids, for example, blood pressure, diabetes, bone loss, all kinds of things happen just because you took the
Yeah.
medication rather than
Yeah.
it bringing you back into balance and healing you. Right. So
Yeah.
that's where I think the
Absolutely.
integrative approach within the education also plays a role. And then we have, I would say, uh, I think one of the most untapped resources we have is herbal medicine because we as a
Yeah.
tropical country have such a diversity of herbs. And if we were able to educate people on how to use the herbs that are growing around, right around them, and you harvest them, you use them, what's in your kitchen that can help you. There's a really good book called Healthy at Home, and
Yeah.
that book talks about, it's written by a doctor, an MD, and she has a background in herbal medicine too. And she says, these are the simple things that you can deal with without putting pressure on the medical community at home.
Yeah.
And here is how to do that. And then if you see some of these symptoms, go to the doctor, right? So if we can develop that kind of education around herbs in India, we're going to bring the pressure on the medical community down. A lot more of the things
Yeah.
can be solved at home before you take it to the doctor, right? So
Yeah.
herbal education is very important. I think it's like a missing, untapped resource, and it's cheaper than
Yeah.
it's way more accessible and cheaper than a lot of over the counter, and it's also safer in many ways for some of the things that we
Yeah.
use it for. The final piece, I would say the biggest, most impactful piece would be education, right? So, like I said about the five pillars, if you're going to bring in knowledge about how you handle your own health from a very young age, before you leave school, you need to know how to eat or what to eat, what not to eat, how important exercise is. Whether you like going to the gym or you like hiking or you like to do qigong or yoga, it doesn't matter what you do, but be active, be physically active. It's really important as an animal to do that, right? And
Yeah.
then we go to the sleep. Like, don't do the binge watching and the sleep deprivation as a sign of bravado. It's not worth it. Sleep is like free medicine from nature. Please sleep. It's
Yeah.
important. And if you
Yeah.
sleep, it doesn't mean you're lazy. It means that you are prioritizing your health, and you're
Yeah.
going to perform better if you do get enough sleep than if you don't, right? So, and then the social connection part, I think, is one of the most neglected things, because when people grow up, usually in a family context, you don't realize how loneliness can strike at you. So if you move countries or cities to, get an education or for a job, suddenly you don't have the context of a friends group or anyone to talk to,
Yeah.
maybe even in your whole time zone. And then loneliness becomes, it is actually associated with increased inflammation in the body, right? And so that's why, even though it's part of the emotional well-being, I give it its own pillar, because people don't understand how impactful it can be on your health. So if
Yeah.
you can teach that to a small child growing up and reinforce that it's not just in your head, you really do need social connections. You need to be heard and felt seen by people around you, even just one or two people. Like, but you need that, right? Just like you need food and water, you need friends, you need social connection. And then the final piece of emotional health, like I don't think most people are taught how to handle their emotions, what emotions are, how to talk about them, how to express your needs in a way that is okay, right? Especially men. I think men suffer from this more than women for once, and like one of the things that they suffer more
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
women.
Yeah.
But for example, sadness is okay for a woman to feel, but anger is not. And the opposite is true for a man. A man cannot feel sadness, but he can feel anger. No problem. You're a manly man when you're angry, but if you cry, oh my goodness, it's the end of the world. you know. So it's like the cultural shifts again coming in for this, right? So developing and not even just taking like a small credit class, but repeatedly reinforcing the importance of these five pillars as you grow older. And then every time, like once a year, your company or corporate, whatever thing is, corporate wellness, arranges a workshop for you, and you take a guidance, like a metric of how you're doing on these five pillars, and you get to see, okay, looks like I've been neglecting XYZ, right? Maybe I should fix that before you have a problem. And if you can detect that it's happening, then you can actually
Yeah.
prevent so much suffering later. So I think
Yeah.
education is like critical, public level of education, just the way we had it for any of the infectious diseases, vaccinations, all these other things that get a lot of attention. Bring the same attention into non-communicable diseases and their prevention through lifestyle medicine, and you will prevent the massive disaster that's already happening, but is going to get far worse in the next few decades, because we are heading
Yeah.
down, like we're already getting to be the most, I think diabetes, it's between us and China, but it's
Mm.
blooming in India. Like it's just
Yeah.
skyrocketing. And then
Yeah.
you pretty soon we're going to have similar stats about every other NCD.
Yes.
So if we don't make this like a public health policy that impacts every single person in the country, we're going to see this take more lives and reduce the quality of life and reduce the lifespan. So longevity, like it can go, it's not really going to be something people talk about, because who cares if you live until 95 if you're going to be
Exactly.
suffering for the last 10, 15 years of your life.
Yeah,
That's not
absolutely.
what people want. I have really aging grandparents. They're not
Yeah,
interested in longevity. They're interested in energy and vitality and happiness and quality of life, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
I think,
yeah.
does that somehow put together some of the things that you asked for, like in terms of
Yeah,
vision?
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I think it does, and I think that's a great, I think, way to bookend the conversation as well. Um, and yeah, I mean, I know we're also like over time, but I think I just took away a lot. I think as a practitioner and also as a person, and I think it was great to learn from you and your experiences and your practice. And I do feel that there is no other way but to think about it in this integrated manner. People have to think about health as not just the absence, just like we don't think of peace as the absence of war. I
Yeah.
think we have to think of health as more than just absence of illness.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well said. Yeah, I really think
Yeah.
that we can have more conversations about the specific cultural aspects, and there's so many things that
Yes.
we I wrote down as questions that I didn't get to ask you. So I
Yeah,
think that
same.
we're due for a part two at some point. But
For another
thank you
part
so
two. Yeah,
much,
yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely.
for
Thank you,
coming in
Jen.
and spending this kind of time and t talking about public
Yeah.
health in a way that
Yeah.
really opened my eyes to how it works at a larger scale, because I work at very small
Yeah.
scales, right? So
Yeah.
to open my eyes to like how does it work at a larger scale, it was really, really an interesting conversation.
Thank you so much, Janani. And I think I've learned a lot from this, what I'm personally interested in and I think something that I get to practice as I go ahead, that how do you really change family behavior for individual health?
Mm,
I feel that is the final frontier. Like I really believe in family health. Um, if we are not talking about elder care, can we really talk about child care and women's health and mental health overall? And so, yeah, that's my takeaway from this conversation. And yeah, I mean, if there's a part two, I'm more than excited to at least, have that conversation, talk
wonderful,
more about it.
wonderful. Thank you so much again for coming over for
Thanks.
this podcast. Yeah.
Thank
All
you.
right.
It is my pleasure and all the best for everything that you do.
You too.